This course consists of lecture and practical application. There's a lot of lecture because there's a lot that goes on with these aircraft that you need to know that's not immediately obvious. The practical applications can be interspersed throughout. We'll have breaks whenever you guys need them and allow me to set up the prac app stuff. This is, if you're familiar with the crawl, walk, run ideology of training, this is basically crawl and walk. It's a slight amount of run, but not much. That's not the focus of this. The focus of this is to give you the fundamentals that you'll use later on for actual engagements. These skill sets will be introduced to you. They will not be perfected here. To do this properly, you'll need to play with, play MCC, play SOAR, etc. Start with, let's go over to one of these cobras and take a look at what it is. The purpose of the Cobra is an infantry support vehicle. It prioritizes the threats the infantry is less equipped to handle. In this case, that's armor, or anything with a big gun. It can do a lot of damage really fast. Due to the optic package, this can also do recon and overwatch. It's very responsive for that. Since it's a helo, it's a very responsive CAS aircraft. It can work very closely with ground units. Now, as you'll see here up front, we have a 20mm cannon. On the wings, we have FFARs and tow missiles. You'll also note that this aircraft has two main rotors, or two blades on the main rotor, and two blades on the tail rotor. This is an AH-1 Whiskey Cobra. The Zulu Cobra, the newer ones, you'll see those over to the west. You'll note that that has 4 blades for both those rotors. That one also has sidewinders. We're not using those here. That one also has Hellfires, which we're also not using here. The reason we're using the tow missiles is because personally, I think they require more skill to use. I find them more interesting from a gameplay standpoint. With the tow missiles, you can only really have one of them in the air at once, unlike the Hellfires where you can fire multiples and do some really cool volley stuff. Also with the tows, you must have line of sight for the duration of flight. There is no remote designation as with Hellfires. First thing we go over is the crew roles. There's a pilot and a gunner in this. Pilot sits in the back, gunner sits in the front. Pilot is senior, gunner is junior. The pilot's responsibilities, first of all, obviously, he flies the aircraft. And at the start of the mission, this includes route planning. The pilot is aware of the broader view. He's the one that maintains the situational awareness at a higher level, such as where units are. He passes information down to the gunner as need be to keep him aware of what's going on. He communicates with the gunner to maintain a situational awareness because the gunner is usually in the gun sight and has limited awareness. This includes friendly forces, upcoming maneuvers, stuff of that nature. Anything relevant to the gunner to keep him from killing friendlies or to allow him to be, max effective. Pilot also stays in contact with command. Since the pilot's not engaged in gunnery, the pilot has time to do that. This being your 148, any local communications in the crew are just done on the intercom, which is direct speaking. Pilot also, due to being the one that's flying the aircraft, he determines what weapons are going to be used for engagements, and he tells the gunner this. This is necessary so the gunner knows what to expect. Tow missiles are fired very differently from the cannon. Basically, all weapon systems require the pilot to do a significant portion of the maneuvering. The turret does not turn 360 degrees. So the pilot's the best place to determine what to use. This is why he is in charge of that. Pilot's responsibility is to protect the airframe and get the gunner into position to fire. All this maneuvering is intended to fulfill one of those. If the aircraft gets hit, it was almost certainly the pilot's fault, not the gunner. Because of the fact he's in a broader view of awareness of what's happening, the pilot is in control of the gunner's fires. He sets them hot, he sets them cold. Over the course of any engagement, the gunner may not be aware that friendly forces have maneuvered, whereas the pilot should be. That's his job. For these FFARs, since those are aligned with the nose of the aircraft, the pilot actually fires those. So that's the one weapon system the pilot gets to employ. Very briefly, does anyone have any questions about the pilot? Very briefly, does anyone have any questions about the pilot? Alright, next up we have the gunner. As I said, he's a junior crew member. He's responsible for the cannon and the ATGM. The gunner has a sensor pod that's slaved to the cannon. He uses that to search for targets. He constantly searches for them. That sensor pod has very high magnification. It has 4 steps of magnification. Additionally, it has daylight TV and thermal vision. When the pilot sees something, he directs the gunner towards it. The gunner uses that sensor to determine IFF, identify friend or foe. When the gunner is not, actively engaging, the gunner is free to do other tasks. He can assist with navigation. Gunner can determine firing positions, especially for tows. Gunner can mark the map for enemy positions. He often sees these better than the pilot does. Gunner is also clear to communicate with ground and command. This may include the gunner could potentially be on the squad freak of whoever they're supporting, while the pilot is on the command freak. One very important thing to note is because the pilot's sitting behind the gunner, gunner sees better to the front of the aircraft. Gunner also has that sensor pod. Whenever landing, whether this is emergency or otherwise, the gunner will use that sensor pod and his better visibility to talk to the pilot and let him know if it's clear in front. That is extremely important in an auto-rotation setting, especially when we're out in terrain like Cell. Alright, we're going to go over some of the crew communication brevity. Before we do, does anyone have any questions about the crew roles and their assignments? Okay. As I said earlier, both the pilot and gunner tune the command net, and verbal communications are done through direct speaking. Let's go ahead and mount up our aircraft so we can talk over some of the things you'll see in there. Alright, first step of this, we're going to talk about crew awareness. Gunner has a turret indicator. If you go into your gun sight, pressing your optics key, which I believe by default is numpad delete. In your upper left, this turret indicator shows your offset relative to the helo's nose. Does everyone see that? Keep in mind that your gun and that sensor is stabilized. As the aircraft turns, it will not turn with it. However, the gun does not have a 360 traverse. Eventually, it'll hit the traverse limits, at which point you'll see it start to rapidly pan. Pan your gun all the way to left or right. Get an idea for how far it is. It's a pretty significant arc. And now here's the fun part. Pilot, press your iron sight key or your gun optic key. You will now see through the same sensor that the gunner is using. Possibly numpad delete, possibly iron sight. I forget, I have different keybinds. Thing to note is that you will not be able to magnify that zoom. You can, however, you can turn on the thermal from there if you press your in key. What you see as far as zoom and thermal mode on or off does not correlate with what the gunner sees. This mode is useful for getting a basic idea of where the gunner is looking. You can't IFF like he can, but you can confirm what he's seeing. This is very good to talk your gunner onto a target. You see something in the broader view, you go into his view, maybe he needs to go right, you tell him that. It's very simple. When you're in the gunner optic as a pilot, you'll see that your FFR circle will show up. This gives you an idea where your nose is pointed. You can use this to make some minor corrections, assuming the gunner is looking towards the front. One trick the gunner can use is he can ask for the pilot to check his scope to confirm alignment. Now we'll move on to communicating targets. There's 4 primary methods to do this. One is a compass bearing. You should see a compass, at the top of your screen with a digital readout as to where you're looking. Keep in mind the compass bearings change very quickly when you're in the air, especially when you're orbiting around a target, so give frequent updates if that's the method you're using. Another method is a clock bearing. 12 o'clock is straight ahead, basic aircraft kind of clock thing going on, and you can add high or low to that as needed, or a range. Next method is aligning to the nose. The pilot will often orient his aircraft such that the nose is pointing towards a threat, and then he'll tell the gunner, threat off the nose at such and such range. The last way to communicate targets is via the gunner's aim. You'll do a relative offset as I talked about earlier, where you see where the gunner